Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 689, and today is October 25th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Not a ton of news to wrap up the week here, so it'll probably be a show on the shorter side, but I appreciate you all taking the time to share the show all the same. It, of course, is hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show, and it's up anywhere you could listen to podcasts. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. And if you don't already, head over. I am approaching 7,000 followers. And so help me hit that mark by adding your name to my follower list. All right, here we go. First article up today. This one I wrote for the Institute on October 24th. U.S. slow walking Zelenskys request to join NATO. So U.S. and NATO officials said that the U.S. and Germany are blocking Ukrainian President Zelensky's request to join the North Atlantic Alliance. Kiev has been pushing for NATO to accept Ukraine as its 33rd member as a part of Zelensky's latest victory plan. Four NATO and U.S. sources speaking with Politico told the outlet that Washington and Berlin are slow walking. Zelensky calls for Kiev to be immediately added to the alliance, and Hungary and Slovakia also oppose Ukraine's ascension into the Washington-led bloc. U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Julianne Smith, explained that the White House's position to Politico is the alliance has not to date reached the point where it is prepared to offer membership or an invitation to Ukraine. In a Facebook post, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban describes Zelensky's victory plan as, quote, terrifying, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz argued that Ukraine should not be admitted to the alliance because NATO should seek to avoid direct war with Russia. He said last week, "We are making sure that NATO does not become a party to the war, so that war does not turn into a much greater catastrophe." In 2008, Washington led the NATO alliance in promising Kiev that Ukraine would one day become a member of the bloc. However, the Kremlin argued that Ukraine joining NATO would present a national security threat to Moscow. Over the following 16 years, Washington orchestrated a coup in Ukraine and removed leaders with ties to Moscow for a government that sought to deepen ties with the West. Additionally, NATO increasingly treated Kiev as a de facto member state with arms transfers and war games on Ukrainian soil as well as in the Black Sea. In 2022, arguing that Kiev's ties to NATO have become too much of a threat for Moscow to ignore, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion of Ukraine. And so, I mean, it's not surprising to me that this is both Washington and Berlin's policy, because this has been the case for years and years and years now. The problem that I really have with it is particularly Washington continues to dangle the carrot in front of Kiev in order to get Zelensky to continue to send his young men and women to the front lines to die in a meat grinder, all because Washington believes it benefits by weakening Moscow. I'm not even so sure that this war has really significantly weakened Moscow in the way that the West had hoped. However, they are still just feeding the beast nonetheless, and I guess hoping that at the end of the day, Moscow will be in a weaker position. So when the U.S. confronts China over Taiwan, it doesn't have as much Russian support. All right, next up here. House Intel Chief says U.S. must consider direct action if North Korean troops are involved in the Ukraine war. So this is just such an absurd statement. It's Representative Mike Turner, the chair of the House Intel Committee, and he has called for the U.S. to consider direct military action if North Korean troops are sent to fight in Ukraine. So he wrote on X, if North Korean troops were to invade Ukraine's sovereign territory, the United States needs to seriously consider taking direct military action against the North Korean troops, he wrote on X. So this to me is partly concerning, just because, not because I think the U.S. is going to take direct action against North Korea, even if it is sending its troops to the front lines to fight against the Ukrainians, but because Mike Turner is a very powerful man in Washington, the chair of the House Intel Committee, one of the most powerful posts in Congress. And for him to be this stupid and in that position is absolutely terrifying. there's probably a lot of things going on in the world that we don't know about that Mike Turner does. And if this is his take on it, we should all be shaking. So, the Ohio congressman said that if North Korean troops attack Ukraine from Russian territory, the U.S. should support long-range Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory using NATO-provided missiles, which Russia has made clear risks a nuclear war. Turner said, I have long challenged the Biden-Harris administration's unwise position on restricting Ukraine's use of U.S. weapons against targets within Russian territory. If North Korean troops attack Ukraine from Russian territory, Ukraine should be permitted to use American weapons to respond. Turner's comments come after Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said there is evidence of North Korean troops being sent to eastern Russia. North Korea has denied it sent troops to Russia, and when asked about the allegations on Thursday, Russia's envoy to South Korea said he couldn't confirm the reports. I cannot confirm the reports. To my mind, what has been provided as evidence of this is not convincing, the Russian ambassador said. So again, they lack any evidence for their claims. It seems very unlikely that Zelenskys claim that 10,000 North Korean troops have entered Ukraine or are fighting in the war seems very, very unlikely to me, since even Lloyd Austin's statement on this, he said there was evidence of North Korean troops being sent to eastern Russia, but he said it wasn't clear what their purpose was at this point. And so you would think if those troops were entering Ukraine, Austin wouldn't have such a hard time determining what their purpose was. And so if there are troops there, again, as we've been talking about on this show, I think it's part of the Russian-North Korean Mutual Defense Pact, and they're likely there either helping Russia operate North Korean weapon systems or learning about Russian weapon systems in case the U.S. ever attacks North Korea and Russia decides to deploy weapons to North Korea. Then the North Koreans would have a kind of step ahead on using those weapons, and maybe they plan to purchase some in the future or something like that. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at here. Of course, this is no reason to call for direct war with North Korea or to allow Ukraine to use long-range weapons to strike Russia. I mean, both of those are just such unnecessary escalations, and you would have to be a complete moron to recommend it. And next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Former U.S. State Department official says 30-day deadline for Israel to let more aid into Gaza is a PR ploy. So a former Arabic language spokeswoman for the State Department who resigned over the U.S.'s support for the genocide in a genocidal slaughter in Gaza, said in an interview that aired on Wednesday that the Biden administration's warning to Israel to allow more aid into Gaza within 30 days was nothing more than a pre-election public relations stunt. So Hala Rahet told Democracy Now!, I can tell you as someone who worked within the State Department's PR machine that this unfortunately is a public relations ploy. I am sad to say it, but the truth is, it is convincingly 30 days marking the time after the election. Also, it was conveniently leaked. It's not typical for a statement like this to be leaked to the press, but it was. So the Biden administration sent the letter to Israeli officials on October 14th and suggested that if demands weren't met, U.S. military aid to Israel could be affected. However, the letter did explicitly threaten to cut off weapons shipments, and the State Department also declined to say if there would be any consequences for Israel. So the former official said, the reality is that the State Department and the administration at this point is trying to give voters, especially those that are concerned about the conflict in Gaza, some level of hope. As long as you vote for us, after 30 days, we'll enforce the law and we'll make this change. This is absolutely a deception for the voters and for the American people. She added that the U.S. was violating multiple foreign assistance laws and military aid to Israel. Quote, the reality is that we as the United States government are in violation of U.S. law, of multiple laws that your viewers can view on Google for themselves. The Leahy's laws, the Foreign Assistance Act, the Arms Export Control Act, we continue to willfully violate these laws as that we surge U.S. military assistance to Israel. So discussing State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller, Rahet called him a liar. As to Matthew Miller, I'm going to be unequivocal. He's lying, and I know I realize it's quite a forceful thing for me to say, but as a former diplomat, I can assure you of that. She also pointed out the fact that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been an obstacle to a ceasefire deal, while the State Department always blames Hamas. She said, "There has been ceasefire deals that Hamas has agreed to. I'm not one to advocate for a terrorist organization whatsoever, and I want to be clear about that, but the facts are the facts. Hamas has repeatedly agreed to ceasefire deals, and Benjamin Netanyahu is the one who has backed out of those deals." She resigned from the State Department back in April. She was a career diplomat, first entering the Foreign Service in 2006. She is one of 13 officials from the U.S. government agencies who have publicly resigned over President Biden's full-throat support for the slaughter in Gaza. And that is a just depressingly low number. All right, now something that isn't a depressingly low number now. Poll: majority of young Republicans want arms embargo on Israel. So a new poll from Data for Progress surveyed Americans aged 18 to 29 who are likely to vote in the upcoming presidential election, and found a majority of young Republicans favor cutting off military aid to Israel. According to the poll, 52% of young Republicans favor an arms embargo on Israel, while 36% oppose it, and 17% say they are unsure. The results signal that Israel is in trouble when it comes to long-term support from U.S., since Republicans are the more pro-Israel party. The poll also found that 62% of young Democrats were in favor of ending weapon shipments to Israel, while 21% opposed. That's only a 10% margin difference between Republicans and Democrats. That's crazy how much the Republicans are moving on this issue, and that is, I think, very good news. So factoring in independent and third-party voters, the poll found that 55% of all likely voters aged 18 to 29 support a U.S. arms embargo on Israel, while only 29% opposed the idea. The poll found that young Americans who plan to vote this November and the majority favored Vice President Kamala Harris over former President Donald Trump. Both candidates have vowed to continue arming Israel, which enables the genocidal slaughter of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Previous Data for Progress polls have found that a majority of Americans favor a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. The Biden administration claimed it seeks a temporary truce, but hasn't put any real pressure on Israel to agree to one, since the weapon shipments have continued to flow. All right, now let's talk about a little bit what's actually happening inside the Gaza Strip here. Israeli strikes killed 55 more Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Dave DeCamp wrote this one yesterday for antiwar.com. Gaza's health ministry said Thursday that Israeli forces killed at least 55 Palestinians and wounded 132 more over the previous 24-hour period. The latest violence brings the health ministry's death toll to 42,847 and the number of wounded to 100,544. And of course, there are victims under the rubble, and the true estimated death toll is in the six figures. Israeli strikes on Thursday hit a school-turned-shelter in central Gaza's Nusra refugee camp. According to the Al-Adwa hospital, 17 Palestinians, including 13 children and 3 women, were killed by the Israeli attack. One of the children was an 11-month-old baby. The Israeli military claimed that the school was a Hamas command and control center, but offered no evidence. Israeli forces came to carry out an ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza that is focused on the Jabalia refugee camp. In 20 days, over 770 Palestinians have been killed in northern Gaza, with tens of thousands more forcibly displaced, and this is of a population between 300,000 and 400,000. All right, now Israelis are directly attacking hospitals in northern Gaza. So Israeli tanks shelled the Kamal Adwan hospital in Beit Lahani, northern Gaza, on Thursday as patients are dying inside due to shortages caused by a 20-day Israeli siege. According to Al Jazeera, the hospital's director, Hassum Abu Saif, said that Israeli shelling caused severe damage to the intensive care unit. Hours before the shelling, he warned the hospital would turn into a mass grave and that one patient was dying every hour because of the Israeli siege. The doctor said, "There is a very large number of wounded people and we lose at least one person every hour because of the lack of medical supplies and medical staff. Our ambulances can't transfer wounded people. Those who arrive by themselves to the hospital receive care, but those who don't just die in the streets." Also on Thursday, the Palestinian Civil Defense Agency says rescuers were forced to suspend operations in northern Gaza. The agency said, "Our work has completely stopped in the northern government and in this situation has become catastrophic there. The citizens are now without humanitarian services." And that means strikes on buildings where people are dying buried beneath the rubble. Even less people are going to be recovered at this point. So footage from the hospital shows staff carrying a newborn baby in the neonatal unit. The doctor said, or told the Associated Press that some medical staff members have either been killed, arrested, or injured. Dr. Mohammed Ableed, an orthopedic surgeon for Doctors Without Borders, who is at the hospital, said Wednesday that there were over 30 dead people inside the hospital and around 130 injured patients. He described the situation as a death trap in all. There is death in all types and forms in the hospital and in North Gaza. The bombardment does not stop. The artillery does not stop. The planes do not stop. There is heavy shelling and the hospital is targeted too. If it looks just like a movie, it does not seem real, he said. So Kamal Adwan is one of 3 hospitals in northern Gaza that is somewhat functioning and is the only one with a specialized neonatal unit for newborns. The Israeli military ordered the evacuation of all 3 hospitals at the beginning of the month as it started its ethnic cleansing campaign known as the General's Plan in the north, but the staff refused to abandon their patients. Israel usually justifies its attack on Gazan hospitals by claiming Hamas members are present, but never offers any evidence for the claim. 99 American healthcare officials who volunteered in Gaza recently sent an open letter to Biden that none of them ever saw militant activity in any hospital they worked at. This is the statement. The 99 signatories to this letter spent a combined 254 weeks inside Gaza's largest hospital and clinics. We wish to be absolutely clear. Not once did any one of us see any type of Palestinian militant activity in any of Gaza's hospitals or other healthcare facilities. They also say they weren't, not permitted. Oh, there's this wing that you can't go in. They said there was none of that, right? This isn't the case, but yet the White House has echoed Israeli claims here, and this has given a green light for this slaughter to go on and on and on. All right, couple articles here on Lebanon before we wrap it up for the week. Israel kills 3 Lebanese soldiers who were evacuating South Lebanon village. So adding to the growing number of non-Hezbollah casualties in the ongoing Israeli invasion of Lebanon, Israeli forces launched a pair of airstrikes against a village in southern Lebanon, killing at least 3 Lebanese soldiers. The soldiers were in the process of helping facilitate an evacuation of wounded people from the village. The first airstrike hit a house and an unspecified number of paramedics were wounded when a second strike hit them when they were trying to rescue their survivors. This isn't the first time that Israel has hit Lebanese military forces during their ongoing invasion, and it comes just days after Israel issued an apology for having killed 3 Lebanese soldiers in an attack on a vehicle. They claim they mistakenly figured the vehicle carried armed Hezbollah. The Pentagon issued a statement expressing deep concern with the Israeli attacks on Lebanese military targets and cautioned them to take steps to ensure the safety of Lebanese soldiers and UN peacekeepers who have come under repeated attack by Israel. The statement reportedly came a few hours after the bombing, which, this is insane, right? Where the US is saying to Israel, you gotta be careful, you gotta stop attacking the Lebanese military, which we back, and the UN peacekeepers in southern Israel, but here's more weapons to do it with. It makes everything seem like just a complete and stupid statement from the U.S. that nobody takes seriously if they're not going to threaten to cut off Israeli weapon supply. So Israel, for its part, said the attack was under investigation and they do not intentionally target the Lebanese military. They promise lessons will be learned from the incident. At least 11 Lebanese soldiers have been killed by Israel since the invasion began in September. This is in addition to thousands of other people, including a large number of civilians. Over 1 million civilians have also been displaced by the invasion. And then we have Israeli airstrike kills 19 civilians in an attack on family home in southern Lebanon. This one again, Jason Ditz, October 24th, antiwar.com. The civilian death toll in Lebanon continues to escalate during the ongoing Israeli invasion as airstrikes hit civilian targets with no apparent military connections. On Tuesday, such an attack took place in a southern Lebanese town just north of the city of Tyre. Tyre itself has been under intense continued attack from Israel. The attack targeted a 3-story family home of a former school principal. He and his extended family were gathered there after the funeral for his brother-in-law who had been killed on Monday from another Israeli airstrike. In Tuesday's attack, 19 civilians were killed, nearly all members of the same family, including women and several children. 3 passersby were also killed in the strike, including a local imam. An unspecified number of civilians were wounded as well. Israel has not commented on the strike, nor provided any indication why a civilian home was targeted. Israeli attacks civilian homes daily in Lebanon and elsewhere, but gives little priority to offering any pretext for these devastating actions. And if they do, they say, oh, Hezbollah was using it, oh, Hamas was using it, and then the U.S. says it as well. And not only do we have a bunch of dead children, but then we have the U.S. claiming that, oh, they died because there were terrorists there, which is, again, almost always a lie. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for this week. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more shows on Monday.